You know, there's a certain light that comes through the kitchen window in the late afternoon. It's a golden, honeyed light, the kind that seems to hold the dust motes suspended in the air like tiny, glittering memories. I used to stand at that sink, my hands in warm, soapy water, and watch that light crawl across the oak floor we'd installed ourselves, back when David and I were still painting the walls and dreaming out loud. That light, it felt like a blessing. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. It felt like the physical manifestation of a life I had built with my own two hands, a life of love and patience and early mornings and late nights. I was Ruth. I was a wife, a mother, a partner in every sense of the word. And for the longest time, that was more than enough. It was everything. This house, it wasn't just a structure. It was our third child. David and I bought it as a young couple, all bright eyes and terrifying mortgages. It was a fixer-upper, which is a polite way of saying it was a crumbling money pit, with questionable plumbing and a family of raccoons in the attic that were frankly more established than we were. But we saw the potential. David, with his big, booming laugh, would sweep me into his arms in the middle of the debris-filled living room and say, "One day, Ruthie, we'll be sitting in here by a fire, and we'll look back on this and laugh." And we did. We absolutely did. I remember one particular evening 15 years ago now. Our son, Liam, was about 7, and our daughter, Chloe, was 5. They were supposed to be in bed, but they'd crept downstairs and were sitting on a blanket in the corner, their little faces smudged with paint, because, of course, we were painting the walls at 9 o'clock at night. David was on the ladder, cutting in along the ceiling, and I was rolling the main wall with a soothing sage green. We had the old radio on, crackling with some forgotten station. "David, you're dripping," I'd said, pointing to a slow, green tear making its way down the white trim. He'd look down at me, that familiar, mischievous glint in his eye. "Adds character, my love. They'll call it the David and Ruth Green in architectural magazines one day. A studied imperfection." I'd thrown a rag at him. "They'll call it a mess. Now get down here and fix it before it dries." He'd climbed down, but instead of fixing the drip, he'd wrapped his paint-splattered arms around me, resting his chin on my head. We stood there, swaying slightly to the staticky music, watching our children's eyelids grow heavy. I could feel his heart beating against my back, a steady, reliable rhythm that synced with my own. "We're building a life, Ruthie," he'd whispered into my hair. "A real, proper life." And we were. That's what people don't understand when they look at a woman like me, a woman in her 50s who dedicated her life to her family and her home. They see the gray in my hair, the fine lines around my eyes that map 1,000 sleepless nights and 1,000,000 joyful smiles, and they think, what, that I'm obsolete? That my story has already been written? They see the comfort, but they don't see the cost. They don't see the strength it takes to build something from nothing, to nurture it, to hold it together through storms and droughts. The business, Havenworth and Sons, started in our garage. It was David's dream, initially. He was a brilliant craftsman, a woodworker who could make a piece of maple sing. But dreams don't pay the bills, so I was the one who kept the books. Late at night, after the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, I'd sit at the rickety desk in the corner of our bedroom, surrounded by invoices and ledgers. I taught myself accounting. I learned about cash flow, about margins, about the delicate dance of making a payroll. I was the one who soothed angry suppliers, who charmingly negotiated with the bank manager for another loan, who packaged the finished furniture with such care it looked like a gift, even when it was just a shipment of dining chairs. David was the face, the vision, and I was the engine, the heart, the quiet, steady hum in the background that kept everything running. I was thinking about this just the other day, sitting with my Auntie Grace on her sun-drenched porch. Grace is my mother's sister, but she's always felt more like an older, wiser sister to me. She has this incredible warmth that just radiates from her. She was sipping her iced tea, the condensation making rings on the little wooden table between us. "You look tired, my dear," she'd said, her voice soft with concern. I sighed, leaning back in the wicker chair. It creaked a familiar, comforting sound. "Just thinking, Auntie Grace. Remembering how it all began." "Of course, I remember," she said, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "You were so thin, Ruth, all nerves and determination. And David, so full of fire. I remember you coming over here, your hands shaking from exhaustion, with a ledger book that was bigger than you were. You asked me to watch the children for a few hours so you could make sense of the numbers. You always did, you know. You always made sense of the numbers." I felt a lump form in my throat. It didn't feel like work, not really. It felt like building something, together. "That's because it was," she said firmly. "That business has your fingerprints all over it, Ruth. Not just on the ledgers, but in its very soul. You gave it its heart." Her words were a balm, but they also highlighted a quiet, nagging ache that had started to grow in my own heart. Because somewhere along the way, the together part had started to feel lopsided. It started subtly. A few years ago, the business had gotten its big break. A major hotel chain wanted custom furniture for all their new locations. It was a massive contract, the kind that catapults a small workshop into a nationally recognized brand. We needed capital, expertise, a bigger infrastructure. That's when Mark came into the picture. Mark Sterling. Even his name sounded polished and sharp. He was a venture capitalist, a friend of a friend, and he saw the potential in Havenworth and Sons. He offered not just money, but a strategic vision. David was mesmerized. Mark was everything David wasn't: slick, corporate, connected. He wore $1,000 suits and talked about market disruption and scalable growth. To David, Mark was the key to the kingdom. At first, I was hopeful too. We celebrated the partnership with a fancy dinner. I wore a dress I hadn't put on in years. Mark was charming, of course. He complimented me on the home, on the family photos. "David's told me so much about you, Ruth," he'd said, his smile not quite reaching his cold blue eyes. The rock of the family. It sounded like a compliment, but even then, something in his tone felt diminishing. As if being a rock was a static, simple thing, not the complex, dynamic role it truly was. The changes at the company began almost immediately. They moved out of our garage, out of the small industrial unit we'd graduated to, and into a gleaming glass and steel office in the city. They hired a flurry of new people, MBAs, marketing gurus, sales teams. And slowly, my role began to shrink. My careful, handwritten notes in the margins of the ledgers were replaced by slick software reports. My weekly meetings with David about the state of the business were postponed, then canceled altogether. "It's just a new phase, Ruthie," David would say when I tried to talk to him about it, his voice distracted as he scrolled through emails on his phone. "Mark's handling all that now. You should relax. Enjoy the fruits of our labor. You've earned it." "Enjoy it?" I remember saying, my voice tinged with a confusion I couldn't quite hide. "David, this business is my labor. It's a part of me. I don't want to just enjoy it from a distance like a tourist. I want to be in it." He'd looked up then, and for a fleeting second, I saw the old David, my David. He looked guilty. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a placating smile. "I know, love, and you're the foundation. But the foundation doesn't need to worry about the paint color on the top floor, does it?" The metaphor stung. It made me sound like buried concrete. Necessary, but unseen. I tried to lean into this new role. I focused on the house, on the garden. I planted roses. I took up yoga. I had long, leisurely lunches with Auntie Grace. But a part of me was withering. I missed the chaos, the purpose, the feeling of being an integral part of a living, breathing entity. One afternoon, I decided to surprise David at the new office. I baked his favorite lemon drizzle cake, the one I hadn't made in months, and I drove downtown. The reception area was cold and minimalist. A young woman with a severe ponytail and a headset looked up at me with a blank, professional smile. "I'm here to see David," I said. "Ruth Havenworth." Her smile didn't change. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" "Ma'am." The word hung in the air. I was his wife. For 28 years, I had been his wife. I didn't need an appointment. "It's fine, Sarah," a smooth voice said from behind me. It was Mark. He was even more polished in his natural habitat. "Ruth, what a lovely surprise." He gestured for me to follow him. "David's in a strategy session, but I'm sure he can be pulled out for a few minutes." He led me through the open plan office. Young, bright-faced employees typed furiously at their computers. They glanced at me, this middle-aged woman in a simple linen dress carrying a Tupperware container, with a flicker of vague curiosity before looking away. I felt invisible, an artifact from a bygone era. We reached David's corner office. It was huge, with a panoramic view of the city. David was standing by the window, talking on the phone. He looked powerful, important. A stranger in my husband's skin. He saw me and his face registered surprise, then a flicker of something else. Annoyance? He quickly ended the call. "Ruth, what are you doing here?" "I brought you cake," I said, my voice sounding small and foolish in the vast, silent room. I held out the container. He took it, placing it on his enormous, empty desk. "That's sweet, thank you, but you really shouldn't have gone to the trouble." Mark was leaning against the doorframe, a faint, unreadable smile on his face. "It's the little domestic touches, David. Keeps you grounded." The way he said domestic made it sound like a disease. David chuckled, a hollow sound. "That's my Ruth." They shared a look between businessmen, a look that said, "What can you do with these homebound women and their cakes?" I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I had never felt so condescended to in my entire life. By my own husband. "I should let you get back to your strategy," I managed to say, my throat tight. David came over and gave me a quick, perfunctory kiss on the cheek. "I'll be late tonight, darling, don't wait up." I walked out of that office, through the gleaming lobby, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, and I was alone with my reflection in the polished brass. I saw a 53-year-old woman. I saw the gentle sag of a life lived fully. I saw the kindness in my eyes, the patience in the set of my mouth. And for the first time, I saw something else there, too, a flicker of fear. A dawning, chilling realization that the garden I had spent my life tending so carefully was no longer my own. The walls were being redrawn, and I was on the outside, looking in at a world I helped create but was no longer allowed to inhabit. And that golden, honeyed light from my kitchen window. It felt very, very far away. There's a particular sound a heart makes when it first begins to crack. It's not a loud, shattering noise. It's a quiet, internal thing, a faint sigh of strain, like an old floorboard in the dead of night finally giving way under a weight it was never meant to bear. After that visit to David's office, I started hearing that sound in the quiet moments. When I was folding laundry, the warm, clean scent of cotton all around me. When I was weeding the flower beds, my knees pressing into the soft, damp earth. A tiny, almost imperceptible ping, and then another, the foundation was shifting. David's late nights became the rule, not the exception. The man who used to rush home for family dinners, his work shirt smelling of sawdust and ambition, was now a ghost in his own home. He'd creep in long after I'd gone to bed, and I'd lie there in the dark, pretending to be asleep, listening to the careful, distant sounds of him moving through the house, a man trying not to disturb the life he'd built, or perhaps, a man who no longer felt he belonged in it. Our conversations, once long, rambling dialogues about everything and nothing became clipped, transactional exchanges. Did you remember to call the plumber about the guest bathroom tap? I'd ask over a breakfast he was now often too rushed to eat. I'll have my assistant handle it, he'd say, not looking up from his tablet, his thumb scrolling through an endless stream of numbers that seemed far more important than our leaking tap. His assistant, a young man named Jason, who spoke in a calm, efficient monotone and who had, it seemed, taken over the management of David's entire life, a life I used to be the chief architect of. The children noticed, of course. They were adults themselves. Now Liam was in his final year of college, and Chloe was working as a graphic designer in a city a few hours away, but they still had that innate childlike radar for parental discord. Is Dad okay? Chloe asked me one evening over a video call. Her face, so like my own at her age, was pixelated on the screen, but the concern in her eyes was crystal clear. He seemed weird when I talked to him last. All he could talk about was market saturation and leveraged assets. I asked him if he'd seen the new documentary about the whales, and he said, "There's no ROI on whales, sweetheart." I forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle even to my own ears. He's just under a lot of pressure, honey. The business is growing so fast. It's a lot for him to handle. But he's always had you to handle it with him, she said, her voice soft and probing. That was the whole point, wasn't it? The two of you, together? Her words were an arrow to a tender, bruised place inside me. It was, I whispered, the confession, leaving my lips before I could stop it. It still is. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie I was telling us both. The real turning point, the moment the crack became a visible fissure, was the company's annual strategic retreat. For 15 years, it had been a family tradition. Well, a business family tradition. We'd rent a large cabin by a lake. David and I would present the year's successes and challenges to our small, loyal team. There would be a barbecue, a bonfire, a sense of shared purpose and camaraderie. I was the one who planned the menus, who made sure there were enough blankets and that the coffee was always hot. It was my event as much as it was David's. This year, a sleek, embossed invitation arrived in the mail. It was for the Havenworth and Sons Executive Leadership Summit, to be held at a 5-star golf resort 3 states away. My name was nowhere on it. It was addressed solely to Mr. David Havenworth. I held the thick, expensive cardstock in my hand, my fingers trembling slightly. I waited until that evening, when David was home, for a rare, quiet moment, reading the Financial Times in his favorite armchair. "David," I began, my voice carefully neutral. "This came for you, the retreat invitation." He didn't look up. "Oh, good. Mark's team handled the logistics. It's going to be a fantastic event. We've got a keynote speaker flying in from Zurich." "My name isn't on it," I said, the statement hanging in the air between us. He finally lowered his newspaper, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "What?" "The invitation, it's only for you. It's always been for both of us." He sighed, a long, weary sound that suggested I was being deliberately difficult. "Ruth, this isn't that little lakeside getaway anymore. This is a serious business summit. It's for executives, for decision-makers. It's not really your scene." "Not my scene?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "David, I am an executive of this company. I'm a co-founder, for God's sake. My scene is wherever this company is. I built the financial models that got us our first major loan. I decided which suppliers to trust when we were on the brink." "What are you talking about?" He stood up, folding the newspaper with sharp, precise movements. "That was then, Ruth. This is now. The company has evolved. The requirements have changed. It's all high-level finance and corporate strategy now. You'd be bored out of your mind. You'd be uncomfortable." The final word was a slap, uncomfortable. He was dressing up his exclusion in the language of concern. He was telling me I wouldn't fit in. And the terrible, humiliating truth was, he was probably right. I pictured myself in a room full of Mark Sterlings, with their sharp suits and sharper tongues, and a cold dread washed over me. So, that's it? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. My voice was barely a whisper. After all these years, I'm just retired, without so much as a conversation. No one is saying that, he said, his tone softening into that placating, condescending tone I was beginning to despise. You're the heart of this family, Ruth. You always have been. Let me handle the business. You focus on what you're good at, the home, the garden, your charities. He walked over and tried to put his arm around me, but I stiffened. He was partitioning my life, putting me in a neatly labeled box marked domestic, while he and Mark lived in the exciting, important world of business. He didn't see that he was tearing me in two. He withdrew his arm, his face hardening again. Look, Ruth, this is the way it has to be. The business is bigger than us now, bigger than our feelings. I have to do what's best for the company. And what's best for the company is to push me out. The question hung in the air, raw and unanswered. He didn't reply. He just picked up his tablet and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there alone, holding the expensive, exclusionary invitation, feeling the cracks in my heart widen into a chasm. I couldn't breathe in that house. I grabbed my keys and drove aimlessly for a while, the streetlights blurring through my unshed tears. I found myself, as I often did in times of turmoil, pulling into the driveway of Auntie Clara's modest, impeccably kept bungalow. Clara is my father's sister. Where Grace is softness and warmth, Clara is flint and steel. She's in her late 70s, a retired school principal who has seen every kind of human folly imaginable and has very little patience for any of it. She opened the door before I could even knock, as if she'd been expecting me. She took one look at my face, her sharp, intelligent eyes missing nothing. Well, don't just stand there, letting the cold air in, she said, her voice a dry rasp. Come inside. The kettle's just boiled. Her living room was, as always, a sanctuary of order. Books stood straight on their shelves, the Afghans were perfectly folded over the backs of chairs, and a single, majestic orchid bloomed on the windowsill. She handed me a mug of strong, black tea, no sugar, no milk, the way she'd always drunk it. Now, she said, settling into her worn armchair and fixing me with a steady gaze. Tell me what he's done. And I did. The words tumbled out of me, the office visit, the late nights, the assistant, the retreat, the humiliation, the confusion, the profound sense of loss. I told her about David saying I'd be uncomfortable. Clara listened, her face an impassive mask. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her tea. So, she said, placing the mug down with a definitive click. The pupil has surpassed the master, and now he finds the master's methods quaint. It's not like that, I protested weakly, a lifetime of defending David to my more skeptical relatives kicking in automatically. He's under pressure. Mark is persuasive. Mark, Clara sniffed, as if the name itself was a bad smell. A man who polishes his shoes but lets his character tarnish. I've met his type. They're emotional vampires, Ruth. They feed on doubt and ambition. They convince you that the things that made you strong are actually your weaknesses, and that your only salvation is to become more like them. Her words were so stark, so accurate, they stole my breath. What do I do, Clara? I asked, my voice small and lost. How do I make him see? You can't, she said bluntly. A man who is determined to drown will slap away the very hand trying to save him. You cannot reason someone out of a position they did not reason themselves into. This is about his ego. His midlife crisis, dressed up in a business suit. So, I just wait? Hope he comes to his senses? No, she said, her voice softening a fraction. It was the closest she ever came to pity. You prepare, you stop thinking of yourself as David's partner in the business, and you start thinking of yourself as Ruth, a separate entity. What do you know about the company's finances now? What are your legal rights? Do you have any of your own assets? The questions were practical, cold, and terrifying. They spoke of a battlefield, not a marriage. I don't know, I admitted. I haven't looked at the books in over a year. David handles all that now. Through the company. Our personal accounts are joint, but the money flows from the company, Clara finished for me. A company you are being systematically removed from. You are allowing yourself to be made a dependent, Ruth, and dependence is a very precarious position to be in. I left Clara's house feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived. She hadn't offered comfort, she'd issued a warning. A call to arms, but I was so tired. The thought of fighting my own husband, of digging through financial statements and questioning his judgment, felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built. A few days later, I went to see Auntie Grace. I found her in her garden, kneeling on a cushion, lovingly tending to her prize-winning roses. The air was thick with their perfume. I didn't even have to speak. I just sat on the little stone bench beside her, and the tears I'd been holding back finally came, silent and hot. She finished her pruning, wiped her hands on her apron, and came to sit beside me, wrapping a warm, sturdy arm around my shoulders. She let me cry, not saying a word, just holding me as the sobs racked my body. When I was finally spent, hollowed out and raw, she spoke, "Oh, my dear girl. This is a bitter season, isn't it?" "He doesn't see me, Grace," I choked out. "He looks right through me." "I know," she murmured, stroking my hair. "I went through something similar with your Uncle Arthur. God rest his soul. Not with a business, but with his golf. It became his entire world. He had his golf buddies, his tournaments, his strategies. For a few years, I felt like a piece of furniture in my own home. A very reliable, very comfortable armchair. What did you do?" I asked, desperate for a different answer than Clara's. "I waited," she said simply. "I tended my garden. I nurtured my own friendships. I made a life that was fulfilling with or without him, and eventually, he came back." The novelty of the new world wore off, and he remembered the comfort and depth of the old one. He remembered the value of the armchair. It was a gentler path, a more patient one. It appealed to the nurturer in me, to the woman who believed in the power of love and time. "But what if he doesn't come back, Grace?" I whispered the fear that had been gnawing at me in the darkest hours of the night. What if this isn't a phase? What if this is just who he is now? Grace's kind eyes clouded with a sadness that spoke of her own past pains. "Then, my darling, you will have to decide what you are going to do with the rest of your beautiful, valuable life. But for now, be patient, be strong. And for heaven's sake, talk to a lawyer. Just to know you're standing. Knowledge is never a weapon until you need it to be a shield." A shield! Both of my aunts, in their own ways, were telling me the same thing. The season of naive trust was over. The foundation of my life was cracking, and it was time to find out if I was standing on solid ground or on the brink of a collapse. The woman who had built everything was now facing the terrifying prospect of having to inspect the blueprints, alone, to see if the structure could even hold. Patience, it's a virtue, they say. A strength. For a woman, it's often presented as our crowning glory, our moral compass. But I'm here to tell you, there is a fine, almost invisible line between patience and paralysis. After my talks with Clara and Grace, I was stranded on that line, a tightrope walker frozen in place, terrified that any movement, in any direction, would send me plummeting. So, I chose patience, or rather, a hollow, fearful imitation of it. I decided to become the perfect, understanding wife. I would make our home such a sanctuary of peace and order that David would have no choice but to remember its value, to remember my value. I would be so agreeable, so undemanding, that the contrast between the cold, cutthroat world of business and the warm, soft world I curated would draw him back to me. It was a strategy born of desperation, a last, heartfelt attempt to mend the cracks with love and lemon-scented polish. I became a ghost in my own life, a smiling, efficient specter. I stopped asking about the business. When David came home, late and smelling of expensive whiskey and imported cigars instead of honest sawdust, I didn't greet him with questions or complaints. I greeted him with a warm meal kept waiting in the oven, a pressed shirt for the next day, a quiet, undemanding presence. "The house looks beautiful, Ruth," he'd say occasionally, a flicker of the old appreciation in his eyes as he noted the gleaming surfaces and the fresh flowers in a vase on the mantelpiece. "Thank you, dear," I'd reply, my voice a carefully modulated calm. "I want you to have a peaceful place to come home to." And it was peaceful. It was also a mausoleum. He began to bring work home, but it wasn't the rolled-up blueprints and sample swatches of old. It was a sleek, silver laptop, its surface reflecting the lamplight like a cold, unblinking eye. He'd sit for hours at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, the one we'd sanded and stained ourselves, the one that bore the faint, ghostly scars of the children's art projects and 1,000 shared meals, and he'd type, his brow furrowed, his entire being absorbed in the digital world on that screen. One night, he left it open when he went to take a phone call from Mark. I was wiping down the counters, the rhythmic, mindless motion, a meditation. My gaze fell on the screen. It was a complex financial spreadsheet, all dizzying columns of figures and dizzying acronyms. EBITDA, CAGR, ROI. It was a foreign language. My language, the language of numbers I had once spoken fluently, had evolved into something I no longer understood. The sight filled me with a profound and chilling sense of alienation. I wasn't just being excluded from the room where decisions were made. I was being excluded from the very lexicon. The financial rewards of this new, alien business began to materialize in our lives. It started with small things. David bought a luxury car, a silent, powerful beast that purred in our driveway, a stark contrast to my sensible, slightly dented station wagon. "You should trade yours in, Ruth," he said one Saturday morning, tossing the keys in his hand. "Get yourself something new, something fun." The offer felt less like a gift and more like a bribe, a payment for my continued silence, a shiny new object to distract the caged bird. "I'm fine with my car," I said, my voice pleasant. "It gets me where I need to go." He looked at me, a puzzled frown on his face, as if my refusal was a mathematical equation he couldn't solve. "Suit yourself." Then came the bigger things. He announced, over a dinner I had spent all afternoon preparing, that he'd paid off Liam's remaining college debt. "That's wonderful, David," I said, a genuine smile breaking through my carefully maintained calm. "What a relief for him." "And," David continued, a note of pride in his voice, "I've set up a trust fund for Chloe. To give her a head start if she wants to buy a place, start her own studio, whatever." My smile faltered. "That's incredibly generous. But, shouldn't we have discussed that together?" He waved a dismissive hand. It was a strategic financial move, a tax-efficient way to handle some of the company's profits. "Mark's accountant set it all up. It's all taken care of." Taken care of. The words were a door being gently, firmly closed in my face. The financial future of our children, a subject we had once lain awake for hours discussing, worrying over, dreaming about, was now a strategic financial move handled by Mark's accountant. I was being financially sidelined in my own family. The money was flowing a great, golden river, but I was no longer standing on its banks. I was being carried along by its current, with no control over its direction. The most stark symbol of this new reality arrived on my 53rd birthday. In the past, my birthdays were simple, heartfelt affairs. A homemade cake, a carefully chosen book, a piece of jewelry from David that was more sentimental than expensive, a silver locket, a bracelet engraved with the children's initials. This year, he came home with a small, heavy box from the most exclusive jeweler in the city. I opened it with a sense of dread. Nestled inside on a bed of black velvet was a diamond bracelet. It was stunning, cold, and utterly impersonal. It was the kind of gift a powerful man gives his wife when he's too busy to know her anymore. There was no history in it, no memory. It was a statement, not a sentiment. "Do you like it?" David asked, watching my face. "Mark said his wife has one just like it. He said it's the thing to have this season." Mark said. The words were the final twist of the knife. I looked at the bracelet, the facets of the diamonds catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 cold, bright shards. It was the most expensive gift he had ever given me, and it made me feel cheaper than I ever had in my life. "It's beautiful," I lied, my voice thick. "Thank you, David." I wore it that night to the birthday dinner he had planned at a restaurant so trendy and loud I had to lean across the table to hear him. The bracelet felt heavy on my wrist, a cold, glittering manacle. He spent most of the meal on his phone, texting with Mark, while I sat there, a silent, bejeweled mannequin, playing the part of the successful CEO's contented wife. It was after that dinner, as we drove home in the oppressive silence of his new car, that I finally broke my patient silence. The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and brittle. "Do you even know what I want, David?" He glanced at me, surprised. "What? What do you mean? You just got a diamond bracelet. You have a beautiful home, your children are provided for. What more could you want?" And there it was. The fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding that now lay between us. He truly believed that my happiness could be quantified, purchased, and delivered in a velvet box. "I want a partner," I said, my voice trembling with a pent-up emotion I could no longer contain. "I want to be your wife, not your accessory. I want to matter to the business we built together. I want to matter to you." He sighed, a long, exasperated sound that filled the silent car. "Ruth, we've been over this, you matter. Of course, you matter. But the business, it's a different beast now. It's not the two of us in the garage anymore. It's complex, it's demanding. I'm doing all this for you, for us, to secure our future. By erasing our past?" I shot back, the tears finally coming. "By erasing me? I don't need a trust fund for my children set up by a stranger, David. I needed to be in the room when it was discussed. I don't need a diamond bracelet recommended by Mark's wife. I need my husband to know that I hate diamonds, that I've always preferred emeralds." He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the soft hum of the car's engine. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, cold, and final. "I think you're being ungrateful, Ruth, and I think you're being emotional. This is exactly why I didn't want you involved in the high-level decisions. You can't separate sentiment from strategy." The condemnation was absolute. My love for our shared history, my hurt at being excluded, my very womanhood, it was all reduced to a liability, a weakness. Emotional. The ultimate insult in the world of Mark Sterling. I looked out the window at the passing lights of the city, the diamonds on my wrist glittering with a mocking, borrowed light. I was living in a gilded cage. The bars were made of money, of luxury, of a life that looked, from the outside, like a dream. But a cage is still a cage. And I was starting to realize that the person who held the key wasn't David or Mark. It was me. I just had to find the courage to reach for it, even if it meant scraping my hands on the cold, hard, gilded bars. I didn't go to see Grace or Clara this time. I didn't call anyone. I went home, took off the diamond bracelet, and placed it back in its box. I put the box on my dresser, where it sat like a tombstone for the marriage I thought I had. Then I went to the hall closet, pulled out an old, dusty cardboard box labeled Havenworth and Sons, Early Years, and I carried it into the kitchen. I made a pot of strong coffee, the way I used to when we were working late. And then, as the first light of dawn began to tinge the sky, I opened the box. I wasn't going to be patient anymore. I was going to get my hands dirty. It was time to remember who I was. There's a smell that lives in old cardboard, a scent of forgotten time and slow decay. It's the smell of dried-out glue and paper surrendering to the years. As I lifted the flaps of that box, that smell washed over me, a ghost from a life I barely recognized anymore. This was my past, the archaeological record of our beginnings. And I was about to start digging, not for nostalgia, but for survival. The first thing I pulled out was a photograph, curled at the edges. It was David and me, standing in front of the garage on the day we officially registered the business. He had his arms slung around my shoulders, his face split by a grin so wide it seemed to swallow his ears. I was leaning into him, my head tilted against his, holding the freshly printed business license like it was a winning lottery ticket. We looked so young. Our faces were unlined by the years of worry and triumph that were to come. Our eyes shone with a pure, unadulterated hope that felt like a physical ache to look at now. Beneath the photo were the artifacts of our struggle. Hand-sketched designs for bookshelves and dining tables, my neat handwriting detailing the cost of oak versus maple. Invoices written on carbon copy paper, the totals so small they seemed quaint now. A stack of my old ledgers, the pages filled with columns of numbers I had entered by hand, the ink slightly smudged in places from late-night tears of frustration or the sweat of my brow. I ran my fingers over those numbers. They weren't just figures, they were a story. This column here, that was the month we couldn't afford to fix the water heater. That number there, that was the first big payment from a local boutique hotel, the one that allowed us to breathe for the first time in a year. I remembered the visceral thrill of seeing the balance finally tip from red to black, of knowing that our faith, our back-breaking labor, was going to pay off. I had done that. With a sharp pencil and a determined heart, I had charted our course through very stormy seas. And now? Now I was deemed too emotional to understand the complexities of a spreadsheet on a silver laptop. I poured a cup of coffee, the steam rising in the quiet kitchen, and I began to read. I started with the original partnership agreement David and I had drawn up. We'd done it at this very table, with a library book on small business law open between us. It was simple, typed on a typewriter, and notarized at the local copy shop. It stated, in clear, unambiguous language, that Ruth Ann Havenworth and David Michael Havenworth were equal partners in Havenworth and Sons, a general partnership, with a 50/50 split of all assets, profits, and liabilities. My heart hammered against my ribs. 50%, I owned half of the company. Legally, on paper, I had signed this document with such excitement, such a sense of shared destiny. I had never once, in all the years since, thought to question it. It was the foundation of everything, or so I had believed. A cold, clarifying dread began to seep into my bones. If I was still a legal partner, why was I being treated like a retired employee? Why was I being shut out of financial decisions? Had David done something to this agreement? The thought was a viper, coiled and poisonous. I couldn't believe he would, not the David in this photograph. But the David who drove the silent car and gave me diamonds to shut me up. I wasn't sure I knew that man at all. I needed to know more. I needed to see the current state of things. But how? I had no access to the company servers, no login for the financial software. Asking David would only alert him and likely lead to another argument about my being emotional and ungrateful. Then I remembered. Kevin Miller had been our first hired employee, a lanky, quiet young man with a genius for joinery. He was loyal, kind, and he had always treated me with a respect that bordered on reverence, remembering the days I'd bring him a packed lunch when he was working overtime to finish an order. He was still with the company, now a shop foreman overseeing the production of the high-end, mass-produced lines. He wasn't part of the glass and steel corporate world. He was still in the workshop, the heart of the original operation. It was a risk, a huge one, but I was out of options. I waited until mid-morning, when I knew David would be in a meeting with Mark. I went into my garden, my hands shaking slightly, and called Kevin's personal cell number from memory. "Ruth?" he answered, his voice warm with surprise. "Is everything all right?" "Hello, Kevin," I said, trying to keep my voice light, conversational. "I'm fine, thank you. I was just, well, I'm doing a bit of family history for a scrapbook for David's birthday. A surprise. And I was trying to remember the details of some of our early big orders. The ones that really put us on the map. Do you still have access to the old job numbers? The ones from before the new system?" It was a flimsy pretext, but it was the best I could do. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the distant, familiar sounds of a workshop in the background, the whir of a saw, the bang of a hammer. It was a comforting sound. "The old job numbers?" "Yeah, I think so. We had to archive a bunch of that stuff when they implemented the new software. It's all on a server somewhere, but I think I might have some old hard copies in my filing cabinet." "Why?" "Oh, just for the dates and the client names," I said, my voice artificially bright. "For the scrapbook." "It's silly, I know." "It's not silly," Kevin said, his tone softening. "It's nice. Those were good days." He paused again, and his voice dropped slightly. "Things are different now, Ruth." My breath caught in my throat. "I know, Kevin. I know they are." Another beat of silence, filled with the unspoken understanding that we were no longer talking about a scrapbook. "Let me see what I can find," he said, his voice now quiet and deliberate. I'll see what I can dig up. For the scrapbook." "Thank you, Kevin," I whispered, the gratitude so profound it felt like a prayer. "You have no idea how much I appreciate it." I hung up and stood in my garden, the phone clutched in my damp hand, surrounded by the vibrant, oblivious life of my flowers. I had cast a line into the dark water. Now, I had to wait. The waiting was its own special kind of torture. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. Every time David came home, I scrutinized his face for any sign that he knew that my betrayal had been discovered. I was a spy in my own home, my nerves stretched taut as piano wires. 2 days later, a plain, unmarked manila envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to me. There was no return address. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't an old job record. It was a printout of an internal company memo, dated just a few months prior. The subject line made my blood run cold. Corporate restructuring and entity conversion. I scanned the text, my eyes stumbling over the legalese. It talked about converting Havenworth and Sons, a general partnership, into Havenworth Holdings, a limited liability corporation. It discussed streamlining ownership, attracting further investment, and limiting personal liability. And then, my eyes found the lines that stopped my heart. Asterisk. Upon conversion, all equity and voting rights of the former general partnership will be consolidated and issued to David M. Havenworth as majority stakeholder and CEO. The historical 50/50 partnership structure is hereby dissolved. Asterisk. The paper fluttered from my numb fingers onto the kitchen floor, consolidated to David. The historical structure is hereby dissolved. He hadn't just pushed me out. He had legally erased me. He had taken my half of the company I had built with him, and he had made it solely his. And he had done it without my knowledge, without my consent. The partnership agreement we had signed with so much hope was now just a worthless piece of paper, a relic in a dusty box. The betrayal was so absolute, so cold-blooded, that I couldn't even cry. I felt numb, hollowed out. I walked to the sink and vomited, the bitter taste of coffee and shock filling my mouth. I gripped the cool porcelain, my entire body shaking. He hadn't just built a new world that excluded me. He had set fire to the old one and forged the deed to the ashes. I stayed there for a long time, leaning against the counter, staring out the window at my garden. The golden light I had always loved now felt harsh, exposing. I looked at my reflection in the glass, a pale, middle-aged woman, her face a mask of devastation. And then, slowly, something else began to surface in that reflection, something I hadn't seen in a very long time. It was a flicker of steel, a hardening in the eyes. The patient wife was gone. The understanding partner was gone. They had been murdered by a memo. I picked up the fallen paper, smoothing its creases. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. This was financial annihilation. This was him ensuring that if I ever dared to leave, I would have nothing. No claim to the wealth I had helped create. No security, nothing. I went to the hall closet and took out my coat. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to move, to outrun the seismic shock that was threatening to shatter me. I ended up, as I suppose I always would in a true crisis, on Auntie Clara's doorstep. She opened the door, took one look at my face, and wordlessly stepped aside. I walked in and handed her the memo. I didn't speak. I just watched her face as she read it, her sharp eyes scanning the lines, her lips pressed into a thinner and thinner line. When she finished, she looked up at me. There was no, "I told you so," no pity. There was only a cold, grim fury. "Well," she said, her voice like chipped ice. "There it is, the knife. And it's been in your back for quite some time, by the look of it." I finally found my voice, and it was a raw, broken thing. "What do I do, Clara? He's taken everything." Clara's eyes blazed. "He has taken what he thought was everything, but he has forgotten one crucial thing, Ruth." She took a step toward me, jabbing a bony finger at my chest. "He has forgotten the woman who kept the ledgers. He has forgotten that you are not some docile creature who can be pensioned off and placated with trinkets. He has awoken you. And that, my dear, is his gravest mistake." She picked up her old-fashioned rotary phone from its table. "It's time to stop looking in dusty boxes for the past," she said, her dialing the number with a decisive click, click, click. "It's time to get a lawyer, a shark. And it's time to show David Havenworth that the quiet, emotional woman he thinks he knows is the very same woman who built an empire with him. And she is perfectly capable of taking her share of it back." As she spoke to her attorney, a man she described as a barracuda in a pinstripe suit, I stood in her orderly living room, the damning memo clutched in my hand. The numbness was receding, burned away by a rising, righteous fury. David and Mark thought they were so clever, so strategic. They thought age and emotion were weaknesses. They were about to find out they were weapons, and I was just remembering how to wield them. Clara's lawyer, a man named Arthur Ponderosa, worked out of an office that smelled of lemon polish and old money. It wasn't in a gleaming skyscraper, but in a venerable, brick-faced building in the old part of the city, a place where the walls seemed to whisper of settled disputes and long-held secrets. There were no glass partitions or noisy, open-plan spaces here. Just heavy, dark wood doors, thick carpet that swallowed sound, and the soft, efficient click of a secretary's typewriter. It was the antithesis of Mark Sterling's world, and I found an immediate, strange comfort in that. Mr. Ponderosa himself was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of brilliant white hair, a perfectly trimmed mustache, and eyes that held the calm, assessing gaze of a man who has seen every shade of human deceit and is no longer surprised by any of it. He wore a pinstripe suit, immaculately tailored, and when he shook my hand, his grip was dry and firm. "Mrs. Havenworth," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that suited the room perfectly. "Please, have a seat. Your aunt has given me a preliminary overview. Why don't you start from the beginning?" And so, I did. I told him everything. Not just the cold facts of the memo Kevin had sent me, but the whole aching story. The early days in the garage, the late nights with the ledgers, the creeping sense of alienation, the diamond bracelet. The way David now used words like emotional and strategic as weapons. I laid my broken marriage and my stolen legacy on his large, mahogany desk, and I watched as he listened, his expression never changing, occasionally making a neat note on a yellow legal pad with a fountain pen. When I finished, the room was silent except for the soft tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. I felt drained, laid bare, but also, for the first time, a flicker of hope. I had been heard. Not judged, not placated, but professionally, dispassionately heard. Mr. Ponderosa placed his pen down carefully, aligning it parallel to the edge of his desk. "Mrs. Havenworth," he began, "what your husband has done, with this corporate conversion, is a severe breach of fiduciary duty and, in my opinion, constitutes fraud. You were a legal partner in a general partnership. You cannot simply be dissolved without your knowledge, consent, and fair compensation. The fact that you received none of these things makes this a very clear-cut case." The words fraud and clear-cut were like a life raft thrown to a drowning woman. "But he did it," I said, my voice small. "The company is an LLC now. It's done." "On paper, perhaps," Mr. Ponderosa said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "But the law cares rather deeply about how things are done. This wasn't a simple business decision, it was a deliberate covert action to disinherit his business partner, who also happens to be his wife. The courts tend to look very dimly on that sort of thing, especially in a community property state." He steepled his fingers. "Our first step is to file a motion to freeze the company's assets and halt any further major financial transactions. We cannot have Mr. Havenworth or Mr. Sterling moving money around or leveraging company assets while we establish your claim. The second step is to file a lawsuit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and to petition the court to void the corporate conversion due to the fraudulent way it was executed." A lawsuit. The word was so final, so destructive. It was the nuclear option. It would mean a public, ugly war. There would be no going back. "He'll fight it," I whispered. "David and Mark. They have lawyers, money. Let them," Mr. Ponderosa said, his voice utterly calm. "They have money, yes, but we have the truth, and we have the law. In my experience, the latter two are often more powerful than the former, if one has the patience and the fortitude to see it through." He looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. "This will not be pleasant, Mrs. Havenworth. They will attack your character. They will try to paint you as a greedy, scorned woman who didn't understand the complexities of her husband's success. They will use your age, your gender, your role as a homemaker against you. You must be prepared for that." I thought of David calling me emotional. I thought of Mark's condescending smile. I knew exactly the kind of attacks that were coming. The fear was a cold stone in my stomach, but beneath it I felt a new, solid core forming, a core of anger, of righteousness. "I'm prepared," I said, and I was surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Mr. Ponderosa gave a slow, approving nod. "Good." The machinery of the law began to turn with a terrifying, impersonal efficiency. Mr. Ponderosa filed his motions. I signed a stack of documents that felt like a mile high, my hand cramping. And then, we waited. The explosion came 2 days later. I was in the kitchen, trying and failing to eat a piece of toast, when I heard David's car screech to a halt in the driveway. The front door slammed open with such force that the pictures on the wall rattled. He stormed into the kitchen, his face a thundercloud of purple rage. In his hand, he clutched a sheaf of papers, the legal documents we had filed. He threw them onto the kitchen table, sending my plate and coffee cup skittering. "What the hell is this, Ruth?" he roared, his voice shaking with a fury I had never seen in him before. I put my toast down carefully, wiping my hands on a napkin. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I kept my face calm. "It looks like legal documents, David." "Legal documents?" he spat, leaning over the table, his eyes bulging. "You're suing me? You're trying to freeze the company's assets? Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what you're doing? You'll destroy us. You'll destroy everything we've built." We built, David, I said, my voice quiet but clear. You seem to have forgotten that part, and I am not destroying anything. I am claiming what is legally, rightfully mine, something you tried to steal from me. Steal? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I didn't steal anything. I protected us. The corporate structure was a necessary evolution. It was to protect our personal assets from business liabilities. Something you would understand if you had the first clue about modern finance. A necessary evolution that just happened to transfer my half of the company solely to you. I asked, raising an eyebrow. Without telling me? Without my signature? How very convenient. His mask of righteous anger slipped for a second, revealing a flicker of guilt, of panic. He straightened up, trying to regain control. This is that harpy Clara, isn't it? She's put these ideas in your head. She's always hated me. Or is it that ambulance chaser Ponderosa? I've heard of him. A dinosaur. No, David, I said, standing up to face him. The fear was still there, but it was being steadily consumed by the cold fire of my resolve. This is me. This is the woman you called emotional. This is the woman you thought you could placate with diamonds and push into a corner. You underestimated me. You and Mark both. The mention of Mark's name seemed to refuel his anger. This is about Mark, isn't it? You're jealous. Jealous of the time I spend with him, jealous of his success, jealous that he's helped me build something bigger than you ever could. His words were meant to wound, and they did. But they also revealed the profound depth of his self-deception. He truly believed this was about petty jealousy, not about fundamental justice. This isn't about Mark, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. This is about you, and me, and the fact that you betrayed me. You betrayed our partnership, you betrayed our marriage. You looked at the woman who stood by you for 30 years, who worked herself to the bone for your shared dream, and you decided she was expendable. A liability. Well, you were wrong. He stared at me, his chest heaving. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the chasm between us now a vast, uncrossable canyon filled with legal papers and broken trust. I'll fight this, Ruth, he said, his voice low and venomous. I'll spend every last penny of the company's money to fight you. I'll drag your name through the mud. I'll make sure everyone knows you're just a bitter, menopausal woman trying to cash in on her husband's success. You won't get a cent. You'll end up with nothing. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. This was the man I had loved, had built a life with, had raised children with. Now he was threatening to financially obliterate and publicly humiliate me. I looked him straight in the eye, my own gaze as steady as Mr. Ponderosa's. Then that's a risk I'll have to take. But know this, David, I am not the woman I was a month ago. And you have no idea what I'm capable of. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing there amidst the wreckage of our life together. I went upstairs to the bedroom, my legs feeling like rubber. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to the silence below. Then, I heard another sound. The front door slammed shut again. He was gone. I slid down to the floor, my entire body trembling. The confrontation had been even more terrifying than I had imagined. His rage was a tangible, violent thing, but I had stood my ground. I had not cried. I had not begged. I had fought back with words, my only weapons. I pulled out my phone. My finger hovered over Grace's number, yearning for her soft comfort. But I knew what she would say. She would tell me to find a way to make peace, to avoid this terrible war. And I couldn't do that anymore. There was no peace to be had on David's terms, not anymore. Instead, I called Clara. Well? She asked, without preamble. He was here, I said, my voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. He was monstrous, Clara. He threatened to destroy me. Of course he did, Clara said, her voice crisp and matter-of-fact. A cornered rat will always bare its teeth. But you are not a cat to be frightened by a rodent's squeak. You stood up to him? I did. Good. Then the first battle is won. The war is just beginning. Remember what Mr. Ponderosa said. Fortitude and patience, Ruth. Fortitude and patience. I hung up and stayed there on the floor, watching the afternoon light fade outside the bedroom window. The gilded cage was shattered. I was out. But I was now standing in a barren, open field, with a storm gathering on the horizon, and a man who was once my husband aiming a cannon directly at my heart. I had my truth, and I had my lawyer. It would have to be enough. A war, I quickly learned, is not fought on a single battlefield. It's a series of skirmishes, some loud and explosive like David's kitchen tirade, others quiet, insidious, and far more damaging. The legal battle was one front. The battle for public opinion, for the hearts and minds of our friends, our family, our community, was another. And it was on this second front that David and Mark proved themselves to be ruthless, tactical generals. It started subtly, a coldness from the woman who ran the local bakery, a woman I'd known for 20 years. She'd always save me a loaf of her sourdough, but now when I went in, she was suddenly too busy stacking muffins to meet my eye. Then, I was uninvited from the annual neighborhood garden tour, an event I had helped organize for a decade. The email from the committee chair was full of flimsy excuses about streamlining and a new direction. The final, stinging blow came from my own son. Liam called me, his voice tight with a confusion that bordered on accusation. "Mom, what's going on? Dad says you're suing the company. He says you're trying to tank everything he's worked for. Is that true?" I felt the world tilt beneath me. I was sitting in Auntie Grace's sunroom, and the vibrant red of her geranium suddenly seemed garish and hostile. "Liam, honey, it's not that simple. It seems pretty simple from here," he interrupted, and I could hear the echo of David's rhetoric in his tone. "He said you're jealous of Mark, that you never supported the company's growth, and now you want to punish him for his success. He said you hired some shark lawyer to go after him. He's really upset, Mom. He says you're being vindictive." Vindictive. The word was a poison dart, expertly aimed. David was reframing my fight for legal and financial justice as a petty, personal act of revenge. He was painting himself as the visionary, the hard-working success story, and me as the bitter, aging wife trying to claw back irrelevance I had willingly surrendered. "Liam," I said, my voice trembling with the effort to remain calm. "Your father, he legally took my half of the company from me, without telling me, without my permission. The business I helped start, the one I kept afloat for years when he was the dreamer and I was the pragmatist, he stole from me. I am not trying to tank the company. I am trying to get back what is mine." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, the conflict between the father he admired and the mother he loved. "But why wouldn't he just talk to you about it? Why would he need to steal?" "That," I said softly, "is the question you need to ask him. And ask him why he felt the need to tell you I'm vindictive instead of telling you the truth." The call ended with a strained "I love you, Mom" that felt more like a goodbye than an affirmation. I put the phone down on Grace's wicker table, the click unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Grace was watching me, her kind face etched with worry. She had heard my side of the conversation. "Oh, Ruth," she sighed. "He's turning the children against you." "He's telling his version of the story," I corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless when my own son was looking at me with doubt in his eyes. "And his version is slick. It's designed to make him look like the victim and me look like the villain." "It's a old, ugly playbook," a sharp voice said from the doorway. Auntie Clara stood there, holding a grocery bag. She had let herself in, as she often did. The husband ascends to greatness, decides his first wife is part of the old model, and then sets about systematically destroying her credibility so that when he discards her, public opinion is already on his side. "He's laying the groundwork, Ruth, making you look unstable, greedy, and unreasonable." "But people know me," I protested. a desperate plea in my voice. They know us? The Johnsons, the Cartwrights. We've had barbecues with them for 20 years. They can't believe this of me. Clara gave me a look that was part pity, part impatience. People believe what is shouted the loudest and repeated the most often. And your David has a megaphone now. Money, status, a powerful new friend. You have us. And the truth, which do you think is more compelling at a cocktail party? Her words proved prophetic. The gossip became a tide, and I was drowning in it. I found out from a sympathetic, and deeply embarrassed, neighbor that David and Mark were hosting lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants, casually discussing the unfortunate situation with David's troubled wife. The story being spun was a masterpiece of misdirection. I was the woman who couldn't handle success. I was overwhelmed by the complexity of the new business, felt neglected, and was now lashing out in the most destructive way possible. My lawsuit wasn't about principle, it was about a menopausal meltdown. The most devastating public moment came at the charity gala for the local art museum. I had been on the planning committee for years. It was my world, the world of genteel fundraising and community patronage. I had bought a new dress, a deep emerald green, determined to hold my head high. I walked in on the arm of Auntie Grace, a silent show of solidarity. For the first hour, it was a study in excruciating politeness, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Brief, hurried conversations that ended with, "Oh, there's so-and-so, I must just go and say hello." I was a social leper. And then, I saw them. David and Mark had arrived, and they were holding court at the center of the room. David looked triumphant in his tuxedo. Mark was beside him, a glass of champagne in his hand, his smile a razor blade. And they were, with a woman I had never seen before. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, stunningly beautiful, and dressed in a sleek, backless gown that screamed money and modernity. She was hanging on David's arm, laughing at something Mark said. The air left my lungs. It was one thing to hear rumors, to feel the cold shoulders. It was another to see the physical manifestation of my replacement, paraded in front of everyone we knew. This was the final piece of their narrative, David Havenworth, the successful, virile entrepreneur, moving on from his troubled, aging wife to a woman who could match his new, glamorous pace. I stood frozen, my emerald dress feeling like a costume from a forgotten play. Grace's hand tightened on my arm. "Breathe, Ruth," she whispered. "Don't you dare let them see you cry." But I wasn't going to cry. A strange, cold calm descended over me. I watched them, this new trinity of power and youth, and I saw it for what it was, a performance. A carefully staged piece of theater designed to humiliate me and solidify David's status as the wronged party. Then, David saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded room. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting moment, I didn't see a powerful CEO. I saw a boy who had been caught in a lie. He quickly recovered, his gaze turning cold and dismissive before he deliberately turned his back to me, leaning in to whisper something to the young woman, who giggled. It was the most public dismissal imaginable. "Let's go," I said to Grace, my voice surprisingly steady. "No," Clara's voice cut in from behind me. I hadn't seen her arrive. She was wearing a severe black dress that looked more like battle armor than evening wear. "You will not run. You will not give them the satisfaction. You will walk out of here with your head held high, and you will stop at their little circle and you will wish them a pleasant evening." "Clara, I can't," I gasped. "You can, and you will," she insisted, her eyes blazing. "You are Ruth Havenworth. You built an empire from a garage. You are not some shrinking violet to be crushed by their tacky display. Now, go." Propelled by her iron will, I let go of Grace's arm and walked. I cut a path through the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs. The chatter around me seemed to die down, as people noticed my trajectory. I was walking towards the epicenter of the scandal. I stopped just in front of them. David turned, his face a mask of strained politeness. Mark's smile was a predatory gleam. The young woman looked at me with a blank, vapid curiosity. "David, Mark," I said, my voice clear and carrying. I didn't shout, but I didn't whisper either. "I see you're enjoying the gala." "Ruth," David said, his tone warning. I ignored him and turned my gaze to the young woman. I gave her a small, polite smile. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Ruth Havenworth, David's wife." The woman had the decency to look flustered. She glanced at David, then back at me. "I'm Natalia." "It's lovely to meet you, Natalia," I said, my tone as sweet as poison. "It's so nice of you to keep David company while he and I are working through our legal matters. I do hope he's warned you that the discovery process can be so terribly invasive. All those financial records, all those private emails, it's enough to make one quite nervous, don't you think?" I saw a muscle in Mark's jaw twitch. David's face drained of color. I turned my smile back to David. "Well, I won't keep you. Do try the canapés, they're excellent. Good night." I turned and walked away, leaving a pocket of stunned silence in my wake. I didn't look back. I walked straight out of the ballroom, through the lobby, and into the cool night air, Grace and Clara flanking me like proud, fierce guardian angels. I had not run, I had not cried. I had walked into the heart of their smear campaign, and I had fired a single, precise shot across their bow. I had reminded them that I was not just some emotional woman to be sidelined. I was a legal adversary. I was the one with the Barracuda lawyer. And I was not afraid of discovery. The ride home was silent. As Clara dropped me off, she turned to me. "That," she said, a rare, genuine smile on her face, "was worth 1,000 legal motions. You have just shown them you are not prey. Now, let's see how the predators like that." I went inside my empty, quiet house. The confrontation at the gala had been terrifying, but it had also been empowering. The smear campaign had hurt deeply. It had cost me friends and strained the relationship with my son. But it had also forged in me a new, harder strength. They had tried to break me with whispers and public humiliation. They had failed. The war was far from over. But I had just won a critical battle. I had reclaimed my narrative. And for the first time, I began to believe that I might not just survive this, I might actually win. Empowerment is a strange and fickle creature. It doesn't arrive with a triumphant fanfare. It creeps in during the quiet, desperate hours, born not from victory, but from the simple, stark refusal to be annihilated. The woman who had faced down David and his new world at the gala was not the same woman who had trembled in Mr. Ponderosa's office. A spark had been lit in the cold, dark cellar of my soul, and I was slowly, carefully, learning how to tend it. The legal process, Mr. Ponderosa informed me, was now moving into the phase known as discovery. This was where both sides had to lay their cards on the table, a forced, legal transparency. We would be entitled to see their financial records, their emails, their internal memos, and they would be entitled to see ours. It was a daunting prospect, this invasive, mutual undressing. But Mr. Ponderosa was almost gleeful. "This is where we find our treasure, Mrs. Havenworth," he said, steepling his fingers. In the discovery process, arrogance is often the undoing of the powerful. They become so accustomed to their own narrative, they forget that the paper trail never lies. A few days later, a mountain of cardboard boxes was delivered to Mr. Ponderosa's office by a courier from Havenworth Holdings. They contained the documents David and Mark's lawyers had been compelled to provide. I went down to his office, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety and anticipation. The boxes were stacked in a spare conference room, a silent monument to the business I had been excised from. "Where do we even begin?" I asked, my voice small in the face of this paper avalanche. "We begin with you," Mr. Ponderosa said simply. "You know the business. You know the players, you know what things should look like. I have junior associates who can comb through every line, but they won't see the ghost in the machine. You will. Look for the anomalies, Ruth. The payments that feel wrong. The deals that don't make sense. The names you don't recognize. And so, I began. I pulled up a chair, opened the first box, and dove in. The first few days were a disorienting blur of financial statements and corporate minutes. It was all so sterile, so sanitized. The soul of the company, the passion, the struggle, the heart had been completely vacuumed out, replaced by the cold, efficient language of corporate governance. But then, I started to find them. The ghosts. It was a series of invoices from a company called Apex Logistics. The name meant nothing to me. The charges were for international freight and handling, attached to several of the big hotel contracts. The amounts were staggering. I pulled out my old ledgers from my dusty box at home, the ones from when we handled similar, though smaller, projects. The freight costs now were nearly triple what they had been. "Mr. Ponderosa," I said, my finger tracing the line on the invoice. "We always used Casterly Freight for years. They were reliable, reasonably priced. Who is Apex Logistics?" He made a note. "We'll find out." A few days later, he had an answer. Apex Logistics was a shell company, registered in Delaware, with a single, named director, Natalia Petrova. Natalia, the woman from the gala. The discovery felt like an electric shock. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore, it was a financial one. They were funneling company money, my money, through a shell company owned by David's girlfriend? Accomplice? I went back to the boxes with a new, feverish intensity. The spark inside me was now a steady, burning flame. I was no longer a victim, sifting through the ashes of her life. I was a hunter, tracking my prey. I found more. Excessive consulting fees paid to a strategic insights group, which turned out to be owned by a college friend of Mark's. Lavish expenses for business development at resorts and casinos, all charged during the time David was telling me we needed to be fiscally prudent at home. But the real jackpot, the thing that made my blood run cold and then hot with a terrifying fury, was buried in a file of internal emails that David's lawyers had likely assumed were innocuous. It was an exchange between David and Mark, dated just a week before the corporate conversion. "Mark, we need to finalize the valuation for the conversion. The assets are one thing, but the intellectual property is the real gold. The designs, the brand. David, the IP is all mine, always has been. Ruth never designed a thing." I stopped breathing. The sheer audacious lie of it stole the air from the room. "Mark, good, but we need to document it. The old designs from the garage days. We should get a fresh copyright filed in your name only. Preempt any sentimental claims. David, already on it. I had a junior designer redraw a few of the early classics. Cleaned them up. Filed them last month under my name. The originals are a mess anyway. No one would recognize them." I pushed back from the table, my chair screeching against the polished floor. I felt physically ill. He hadn't just stolen the company, he was trying to steal our history. He was having some junior designer clean up my designs. The designs I had sketched on napkins and graph paper, the ones we had pored over together, arguing about joinery and aesthetics. The very soul of Havenworth and Sons. The unique fingerprint that had set us apart from the mass-produced junk was being systematically erased and rewritten with David as the sole, brilliant auteur. I thought of the Liam chair, named for our son, its gentle rounded arms designed to be safe for a toddler. I thought of the Grace table, with its hidden compartment for silverware, inspired by my aunt's practical nature. They weren't just products, they were chapters of our life, etched in wood. And he was claiming they were all his. That I had never designed a thing. The flame inside me roared into an inferno. This was no longer about money. This was about legacy. This was about truth. I gathered the emails, the invoices for Apex Logistics, the records of the exorbitant consulting fees. I laid them out on the large conference table like a prosecutor building a case. Mr. Ponderosa came in and stood beside me, looking down at the damning mosaic. "Well," he said, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "It appears the rats have been very, very busy, and very, very careless." "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice hushed. "It means, Mrs. Havenworth, that their case is built on a foundation of sand. This isn't just a partnership dispute anymore. This is evidence of systematic fraud, self-dealing, and misappropriation of company assets. The Apex Logistics invoices alone. They're essentially paying David's girlfriend with company funds. A classic fraud on the partnership. This gives us immense leverage." He picked up the email about the intellectual property. "And this is perjury waiting to happen. He will have to testify, under oath, about the origins of those designs. And we will be ready to prove he's lying." For the first time, I saw a clear path to not just getting my share, but to exposing the whole, rotten structure for what it was. I wasn't just fighting for my past anymore. I was fighting for the truth of it. That night, I didn't go home to my empty, silent house. I went to Clara's. I didn't say a word. I just walked in, went to her small, tidy desk, and took out a piece of her good stationery and a pen. I started to sketch. I drew the first design I had ever created for the business. A simple, elegant hall tree, with sturdy hooks and a small, carved oak leaf at the top, a nod to the tree in the backyard of our first home. I dated it. I wrote notes in the margin about the type of wood, the finish. Then I drew another, and another. I sketched for hours, until my hand ached and the stack of paper was thick with the blueprints of our shared history. It was my own act of discovery. I was unearthing Ruth, the creator, the designer, the partner. I was reclaiming my intellectual property, not in a court of law, but in the court of my own soul. Clara brought me a cup of tea and placed it silently beside me. She looked down at my sketches, at the familiar lines and notes. "They mocked your age," she said softly, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "They thought your time was over, that you were part of the past." I looked up at her, my eyes dry and clear, the fire within me reflected in my gaze. "They forgot," I said, my voice steady and sure, "that the past holds all the evidence. And they forgot that a woman who has built one life from nothing is more than capable of building another from the ashes. They thought they were putting out a fire. They didn't realize they were just teaching it how to burn. Victory, in the movies, is a single, glorious moment. The courtroom gasps, the gavel falls, the hero is vindicated. But, in real life, victory is a slow, meticulous construction project. It's built brick by boring brick, in quiet rooms, with stacks of paper and the relentless ticking of a clock. After the fiery revelation in Mr. Ponderosa's conference room, we entered a period of intense, deliberate preparation. The storm was coming, but first, there was the calm, a calm so heavy with anticipation it was louder than any thunder. Mr. Ponderosa's strategy shifted. We were no longer just defending my claim, we were building an offensive, a devastating one. He assembled a small, focused team, a forensic accountant named Anya Sharma, a woman with the sharp, unblinking gaze of a hawk and a mind that could dissect a financial statement down to its constituent atoms, and a private investigator, a quiet, unassuming man named Leo who looked like a retired librarian but could find a needle in a continent of haystacks. Our mission was clear. We would use their own discovery against them. We would follow the money from Apex Logistics. We would corroborate the true origins of the designs. We would build an incontrovertible case, so airtight that when we finally faced David and Mark in a deposition, the sworn, out-of-court testimony that would form the bedrock of any trial, they would have nowhere to run. Anya took the Apex Logistics invoices and began tracing the money. It was like watching a master weaver at a loom. She followed the electronic trails, through shell companies and offshore accounts, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her screen a constellation of flowing numbers. Within a week, she had a flowchart that looked like a map of the London Underground. "It's a classic kickback scheme, Ruth," she explained to me in her crisp, precise tone. "The company overpays Apex for services. Apex, after taking a cut, funnels the majority of the money into a private account in the Cayman Islands. From there, it's disbursed. A significant monthly payment goes to a non-apartment in the city leased to a Natalia Petrova. Another stream goes to a company owned by Mark Sterling's friend for consulting that was never performed. And a third, smaller stream, goes to a separate account that makes payments on a—" She paused, clicking a key, "a vintage Porsche 911, registered to David M. Havenworth." I listened, my hands folded in my lap, the news landing not as a shock but as a confirmation. The diamond bracelet, the luxury car, the expensive dinners, it wasn't just the fruits of success. It was my money, the company's money, being laundered through a pretty young woman to fund their double life. The betrayal was so tawdry, so cliché, it was almost an insult. Meanwhile, Leo, the investigator, was working on the designs. His job was to find evidence that predated David's new, fraudulent copyrights. He visited old suppliers, tracked down our very first customers, people who had bought furniture from us when we were still operating out of the garage. He took statements, collected old photographs of homes featuring our early pieces. He was, piece by piece, assembling a timeline that proved the designs existed long before David had them redrawn. I worked with him, providing the sketches I had recreated at Clara's house. I dug through old family photo albums, finding pictures of Liam as a baby in the high chair I had designed, of Chloe doing her homework at the grace table. We were building a wall of evidence, and every photograph, every witness statement, was another brick mortared in place with the truth. Through all of this, I was changing. The woman who had been so afraid of conflict, who had tried to solve everything with patience and a clean kitchen, was gone. In her place was a strategist. I spent my days in Mr. Ponderosa's office, or at Clara's kitchen table, surrounded by documents. I learned the language of litigation. I understood the difference between a motion to compel and a motion for summary judgment. I could read a balance sheet and spot a fraudulent entry with a gut instinct that surprised even Anya. One evening, I was at Grace's house, deadheading her roses while she watched from her porch swing. The silence between us was comfortable, but I could feel her worry radiating from across the lawn. "You've become so hard, Ruth," she said finally, her voice gentle but sad. I snipped a spent bloom, its crimson petals falling to the dark earth. "I've become clear-eyed, Grace. There's a difference." "Is there? This battle, it's consuming you. I see the light in your eyes when you talk about leverage and depositions. It's not you." I put down the clippers and walked over to her, my hands smelling of earth and greenery. Who was I, Grace? The woman who baked a lemon drizzle cake and took it to an office where she was called ma'am by the receptionist? The woman who wore a diamond bracelet that felt like a manacle? That woman was already being consumed. Just slowly, by condescension and erasure. At least this way, I'm being consumed by my own fire. I'd rather burn out than fade away. Tears welled in her eyes. "I just don't want you to lose yourself in the fight. I don't want you to become like them." Her words struck a chord, a deep, resonant fear I hadn't dared to voice. Was I becoming cold, calculating? Was I letting their corruption seep into my own soul? I thought of David's face, purple with rage. I thought of Mark's condescending smile. And then I thought of my sketches, of the love and care embedded in every line. "I'm not like them, Grace," I said, my conviction firming again. "They are fighting for money and ego. I am fighting for what's right. There is a world of difference. I'm not trying to destroy David. I'm trying to stop him from destroying the truth." There is a morality in that. It's my anchor. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip warm and familiar. Then hold on to that, my dear. Don't let go. The date for the depositions was set. David and Mark would be questioned under oath, separately, in Mr. Ponderosa's office. The calm was about to break. The night before David's deposition, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the house, a ghost in my own home. I stopped in the doorway of Liam's old bedroom, now a sterile guest room. I remembered teaching him to read in here, the sound of his small, earnest voice stumbling through the words. I went to the living room and ran my hand over the mantelpiece we had stripped and refinished together, our hands touching as we worked the sandpaper. This wasn't just a house, it was a living scrapbook of our life. And tomorrow, I was going to sit in a room and watch a lawyer systematically dismantle the man I had built it with. The thought filled me with a profound, aching sorrow. This was a tragedy, no matter the outcome. There were no winners here, only varying degrees of loss. I ended up in the kitchen, at the table where it had all begun. I opened the dusty box one more time and took out the photograph of us in front of the garage. Our young, hopeful faces stared back at me, brimming with a future that had now curdled into this present nightmare. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on the glass. I wasn't crying for the loss of David, not anymore. The man he was now was a stranger. I was crying for the two kids in that photograph, for the dream they had, for the brutal, ugly reality that had grown from such a beautiful, fragile seed. I wiped the tear away, my jaw tightening. I would not let him desecrate that dream entirely. I would salvage the truth of it. I would protect the legacy of the woman in that photograph, the one with the determined eyes and the ledger book in her hand. She deserved that much. The next morning, I dressed with care. I chose a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress. It was neither aggressive nor passive. It was professional, respectable, unassailable. I looked my age, and I looked powerful in it. I did my hair. I put on a simple pair of pearl earrings that had been my mother's. I was not going in as a wounded wife. I was going in as Ruth Havenworth, co-founder and partner. I met Mr. Ponderosa in the lobby of his building. He looked me up and down and gave a curt, approving nod. Ready? I took a deep breath, the air cool and still in the elegant, silent space. The calm was over. Yes, I said, my voice echoing faintly in the marble hall. I'm ready. We rode the elevator up in silence. The doors opened onto his office suite. And there, standing by the reception desk, looking pale and uncomfortable in an expensive but ill-fitting suit, was David. Our eyes met. There was no rage in his now, only a deep, startled fear. He was seeing the woman from the gala again, the one who hadn't crumbled, the one who had fire in her eyes. He looked away first. The storm had begun. There is a unique, suffocating silence that exists in a room where a life is about to be dismantled word by word. It's the silence of held breaths, of poised pens, of a court reporter's fingers hovering over her machine. We were seated around the large, polished table in Mr. Ponderosa's conference room. The air was cold, conditioned to a degree that felt intentional, meant to keep emotions from overheating. On one side, David, his lawyer, a sleek, anxious man named Mr. Finch, who kept adjusting his tie, and the court reporter. On the other, Mr. Ponderosa, myself, and a silent, observant Anya Sharma. I was there as a party to the lawsuit, allowed to witness the testimony. My role was to be a statue, an unmoving, unblinking reminder to David of the consequences of every word that left his mouth. Mr. Ponderosa began not with a bang, but with a quiet, almost conversational tone. He led David through the early history of Havenworth and Sons, establishing the foundation. David's answers were stiff, rehearsed. He spoke of his vision, his hard work. The word "I" was used like a hammer, driving home his solitary narrative. And what was Ruth's role in these early years? Mr. Ponderosa asked, his voice mild. David shifted in his seat. She was supportive. A wonderful wife. She handled the home front. The home front, Mr. Ponderosa repeated, as if tasting the phrase. So, she was not involved in the financial management of the company? The bookkeeping, the invoices, the payroll? She helped out occasionally, David said, his eyes darting towards me for a fraction of a second before snapping back to Mr. Ponderosa. But it was informal. I was the driving force. Mr. Ponderosa let the lie hang in the air for a moment before moving on. He was lulling him into a false sense of security. He asked about the growth of the company, the partnership with Mark Sterling, the decision to incorporate. David grew more confident, his voice strengthening as he spoke about market share and scalability. He was on familiar, ego-inflating ground. Then, Mr. Ponderosa shifted. It was so subtle, David didn't even see it coming. Let's talk about the corporate conversion from a general partnership to an LLC, Mr. Ponderosa said, picking up a document. This process required a valuation of the company's assets, correct? Yes, David said. And those assets included intellectual property, the designs for your furniture lines? Of course, the designs are the heart of the brand. And who created those designs? The early ones, let's say, from the first 5 years of business. David's jaw tightened. I did. You did, Mr. Ponderosa said flatly. He opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture from our old album, of me sitting at the kitchen table, a drafting pencil in my hand, bent over a sketch pad. The design for the Liam high chair was clearly visible. Can you identify the person in this photograph? David's face went a shade paler. That's Ruth. And what is she doing? She's drawing. Drawing what? Mr. Havenworth. I don't recall. Would it help you recall if I told you this is a preliminary sketch for what would later become the Liam high chair, one of your early bestsellers? David was sweating now. Ruth liked to doodle. She had ideas. But I was the one who engineered them, who made them viable. A sketch is just an idea. The execution is everything. I see, Mr. Ponderosa said, his tone implying he saw everything with perfect clarity. He let the point go, again, allowing David to dangle on the hook. He moved to the financials, asking general questions about company profitability, expenses. David, relieved to be away from the topic of designs, answered with corporate generalities. Then, Mr. Ponderosa struck. Let's discuss a specific expense. Apex Logistics. The company has paid Apex Logistics over $400,000 in the last 18 months for freight and handling. Can you tell me what services Apex provides that justify such a premium over your previous freight company, Casterly? David froze. I could see the panic in his eyes. He looked at his lawyer, who gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. I'd have to check with Mark. He handles the logistics side. You're the CEO, Mr. Havenworth. You sign off on these invoices. Are you telling me you don't know what $400,000 of company money is being spent on? It's a strategic partnership. They provide expedited, white-glove service. It's essential for our high-end clients. A strategic partnership, Mr. Ponderosa mused. He opened another folder. Are you aware that Apex Logistics is registered to a Natalia Petrova? The blood drained from David's face completely. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. I believe she's a consultant we work with. A consultant who owns a freight company you do business with? And are you aware that a significant portion of the funds paid to Apex Logistics end up in a bank account in the Cayman Islands, from which regular disbursements are made to, among other things, a luxury apartment leased to Miss Petrova, and to an account that makes payments on a vintage Porsche 911 registered in your name? The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. David's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His lawyer, Mr. Finch, finally found his voice. "Objection. This is beyond the scope. I'm simply asking if your client is aware of where his company's money is going," Mr. Ponderosa said, his voice like ice. "It's a simple question." David was crumbling before our eyes. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by a trapped, terrified man. The carefully constructed facade of the successful businessman was shattering, revealing the petty thief underneath. "I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights," David whispered, his voice hoarse. A wave of cold disgust washed over me. He wasn't even going to try to lie his way out of it. He was taking the coward's way out. He was admitting without admitting his guilt. Mr. Ponderosa didn't press it. He had what he needed. He had shown the judge, who would eventually read this transcript, that David Havenworth was not a reliable witness. He was a man who would commit fraud and then hide behind the Constitution when confronted with it. The rest of the deposition was a formality. David answered only the most basic questions, his spirit broken. When it was over, he stood up on unsteady legs, refusing to look at me. He and his lawyer practically fled the room. I remained seated, watching the empty space where he had been. I felt no triumph, no joy, only a vast, hollow sadness. This was the man I had loved. This was the father of my children, and he had been reduced to this, a shamed, cornered perjurer, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Mr. Ponderosa was packing his briefcase. "A good day's work," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "He's finished. After this, they'll have no choice but to settle, and on our terms." I nodded, unable to speak. Anya gave me a small, sympathetic smile before following Mr. Ponderosa out, leaving me alone in the silent, cold room. I thought the deposition would feel like a victory. I thought I would feel the fierce burn of justice. But all I felt was the chill of a profound loss. I had stared into the abyss of David's corruption, and it had stared back, hollow and pathetic. I had won the battle. I had the evidence, the leverage, the upper hand. But as I sat there in the echoing silence, I realized that some victories don't feel like winning. They feel like a surgery where a diseased organ has been cut out. The patient is saved, but they are left with a scar and the phantom pain of what was lost. The storm had broken, and the landscape of my life was forever changed. The rain had washed away the lies, but it had also washed away the last fragile remnants of the dream we had built in that garage, under that golden, hopeful light. The days following David's deposition were shrouded in a strange, suspended silence. The frantic energy of preparation was gone. The fierce fire of the hunt had banked to embers. We had done our work. The trap had been sprung. Now, we waited for the prey to stop thrashing and accept its fate. Mr. Ponderosa called it the negotiation phase. I called it the quiet aftermath of an execution. The lifeblood of David's deception had been let, and now his lawyers were scrambling to stanch the flow, to salvage something from the ruin. The first call came to Mr. Ponderosa from a terrified Mr. Finch. The tone was no longer arrogantly dismissive, it was placating, almost groveling. They wanted to talk settlement, immediately. "They know they're sunk," Mr. Ponderosa told me over the phone, his voice devoid of gloating, all business. "The deposition transcript is a death knell. If this goes to trial, David doesn't just lose the company. He faces a very real possibility of criminal charges for fraud. Mark Sterling could be implicated as well. They want to make this go away." "And what do we want?" I asked, my voice calm. I was standing in my garden, the phone pressed to my ear, watching a bumblebee drone lazily from one rose to another. The ordinary, peaceful rhythm of nature felt a million miles away from the corporate war room. "We want what you are owed, Ruth. 50% of the current valuation of Havenworth Holdings, which, thanks to their own inflated financials, is a very substantial number. We want a formal, public acknowledgement of your role as co-founder and lead designer, for the classic lines. We want your name restored to its rightful place in the company's history. And we want all this structured in a way that minimizes your tax burden and secures your financial future, independently and completely. It was a list of demands that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. Now, it was merely the price of peace. The settlement negotiations took place over a series of tense, closed-door meetings from which I was excluded. Mr. Ponderosa was my champion, my gladiator. He reported back to me each evening, his updates concise and victorious. They've agreed to the 50% valuation. They're balking at the public acknowledgement, but they'll cave. They don't want the details of the Apex logistics scheme becoming public record. A few days later, it's done. The deal is structured. You get a lump sum payment for your back-due share of profits, plus a 49% stake in the newly restructured company. David retains 51%, but you have veto power over any major asset sale or corporate restructuring. Your name will be added to the company's official history as co-founder and principal designer emeritus. All legal claims will be dropped, and both parties agree to a non-disparagement clause. I listened, taking it all in. It was more than I had dared hope for when I first walked into his office. It was total victory. Vindication. And David? I asked, my voice quiet. What does he say? Mr. Ponderosa paused. He's resigned. He knows he lost. He's just trying to avoid prison now. He signed the papers this afternoon. The papers arrived for my signature by special courier. A thick, heavy stack of them, bound in blue cardstock. The settlement agreement and mutual release. I took them to my kitchen table, the same table where so much of our life had unfolded. I poured a glass of water, took out my favorite pen, and I began to read. The language was dry, legalese, but the story it told was epic. It was the story of my resurrection. Page after page, it detailed my contributions, my ownership, my stolen legacy, now being legally returned to me. It was the official, binding record that everything I had known to be true was, in fact, true. When I reached the final page, there was a space for my signature, and next to it, already scrawled in a familiar, now shaky hand, was David's signature. Seeing it there, a piece of him embedded in the document that ended us, sent a fresh wave of sorrow through me. This was the final period on the last sentence of our story. I picked up my pen. It felt heavy, significant. This wasn't just a signature. It was the key to my new life. It was the moment I traded the identity of David's wife for the identity of Ruth Havenworth, co-founder. I took a deep breath and I signed my name. Clear, firm, unwavering. The transfer of funds was dizzying. Numbers appeared in my newly established private accounts that I had to stare at for a long time to comprehend. The financial independence was a physical sensation, a loosening of a chain I hadn't fully acknowledged, was there. I was free, I was secure. No one could ever threaten to leave me with nothing again. The public announcement was a masterstroke from Mr. Ponderosa. A beautifully worded press release went out from Havenworth and Sons, announcing a corporate restructuring to honor its founding legacy. It spoke of Ruth Havenworth, the brilliant co-founder and designer whose seminal work formed the bedrock of the company's aesthetic, and her return to an honored role within the organization. It was a narrative of reconciliation and respect, a complete and utter repudiation of the smear campaign. The words vindictive and menopausal were buried forever, replaced by visionary and founder. The phone began to ring. Old friends who had given me the cold shoulder suddenly remembered our long history. The garden club begged me to rejoin the planning committee. The silence that had surrounded me was broken by a chorus of congratulatory voices. I was polite. I was gracious. I accepted their good wishes and made no mention of their former coldness. I had won. I could afford to be magnanimous. The most important call came from Chloe. She was crying, but they were tears of relief. "Oh, Mom," she sobbed, "I knew it. I knew there was more to it." Liam showed me the press release. He feels terrible. Dad had him completely fooled. It's okay, honey, I said, my heart swelling with love for her. It's over now. Are you going to be okay? She asked, her voice small. I looked around my kitchen, at the signed settlement agreement on the table, at the sunlight streaming through the window. For the first time in over a year, the light felt warm again. It felt like mine. Yes, sweetheart, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. I am going to be more than okay. I invited Grace and Clara over for tea to celebrate. Grace arrived with a freshly baked cake, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Clara brought a bottle of very expensive champagne. We sat in the living room, the three of us. Clara popped the cork and poured the bubbling golden liquid into 3 glasses. A toast? Clara said, raising her glass, her flinty eyes soft with pride. To Ruth, who proved that age and experience are not weaknesses, but a sharpened sword. And to all the small, petty men who never see it coming. We clinked glasses. The champagne was dry and delicious, a taste of victory. Later, after they had left and I was alone again, I did not feel the emptiness I had grown accustomed to. The house was no longer a mausoleum, it was a sanctuary. It was mine. Every repaired pipe, every painted wall, every memory, good and bad, belonged to me. I had not just won a legal battle, I had reclaimed my territory. I had shown them my worth, not through shouting or fighting, but through the quiet, unassailable power of truth and resilience. The reckoning was complete. The balance had been restored. And as I stood in the golden, honeyed light of my kitchen window, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my story was far from over. It was just beginning. They say that when you win, you should be gracious. You should be quiet and dignified and let your victory speak for itself. But the universe, I found, has its own sense of poetic justice, a flair for the dramatic that surpasses any script I could have written. My victory was quiet, secured in signed documents and quiet bank transfers. Their downfall was a public spectacle. It began, as these things often do, not with a bang but with a whisper. A financial blogger, the kind who specializes in digging through the dry bones of corporate filings, noticed the amended corporate structure of Havenworth Holdings. He noticed my name listed as a principal owner and principal designer emeritus. He was a thorough man, this blogger. He started digging backwards, comparing the new filings with the old. He found the original conversion to the LLC, the one that had erased me. He found the paper trail, a little too clean, a little too abrupt. He published a piece titled, "A Founder Reclaimed, The Curious Case of Havenworth's Missing Partner." It was a dry, factual piece, but it asked the right, dangerous questions. Why was a co-founder so publicly absent for years, only to reappear with a major ownership stake? What prompted the corporate restructuring? That piece was a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples reached the business desks of major newspapers. Reporters, scenting a story more compelling than quarterly earnings, started making calls. They called the company. They called Mr. Ponderosa's office. They called me. I followed Mr. Ponderosa's advice and said nothing. Let the story tell itself, Ruth. The documents are all public record now. You have no comment. But David and Mark, trapped in their crumbling fortress, had no such discipline. Panic is a poison that clouds judgment. Mark, in a desperate attempt to control the narrative, gave an interview to a prominent business magazine. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. He sat there, in another one of his sharp suits, and tried to paint the settlement as a compassionate move by a successful company to honor its past. He called me a talented artisan from the early, folksy days, whose contributions they had generously recognized. He said the restructuring was about streamlining for the future while respecting tradition. He thought he was being clever. He was being condescending. And he was lying. The article was published, and the next day the whistleblower came forward. It was Kevin, my quiet, loyal Kevin. He had seen the article. He had read Mark's patronizing words about me, the woman who had brought him lunch and treated him like family. He had watched the company he loved become a vessel for fraud and arrogance, and he had had enough. He didn't come to me. He went directly to the same reporter with a box of his own. It contained copies of internal emails that hadn't been part of our discovery. Emails where Mark and David joked about the old ball and chain and discussed monetizing the nostalgia factor of my designs before pushing me out. It contained shipping manifests that explicitly showed the freight costs from Casterly versus the inflated invoices from Apex Logistics, side by side. It was a smoking gun, delivered with the quiet fury of a man whose sense of decency had been violated. The story exploded. Fraud at Havenworth, screamed the headline. CEO accused of bilking company to fund lavish lifestyle. Co-founder ousted in secret corporate coup. The carefully constructed facade of David and Mark's success shattered into a million pieces. The business news became a morality play. I was the wronged heroine, the brilliant creator betrayed by greedy, unscrupulous men. They were the villains, not just in my story, but in the public imagination. The consequences were swift and brutal. The board of directors, a group of people I had never met, installed by Mark to give the company corporate credibility, forced David to resign as CEO. They cited gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. He was escorted from the building by security, his career in ruins. Mark Sterling was next. His venture capital firm, fearing the contagion of the scandal, publicly severed ties with him. His other investments began to pull out. The Golden Boy was suddenly radioactive. The man who had preached about scalable growth and market disruption found his own market value had plummeted to zero. And Natalia? The apartment in the city, paid for by Apex Logistics, was seized by the company's new management as a company asset. The stream of money dried up. The last I heard, she had moved on. A footnote in the scandal, her brief, gilded chapter closed. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a strange sense of detachment surrounding me. I received a flood of emails and letters from old colleagues, from women who had been through similar betrayals, from strangers who saw my story as a beacon. I was now a reluctant symbol, a poster child for late-life empowerment. The final, personal reckoning came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find David standing on my porch, drenched and shivering. He looked a decade older. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled jacket. The arrogance had been washed away by the rain, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man. "Ruth," he said, his voice ragged. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, holding the door, waiting. Can I come in?" he asked, his eyes pleading. I thought about it. I looked at this broken man, the ghost of the boy I had fallen in love with, the architect of my deepest pain. Letting him in felt like a betrayal of the woman I had fought so hard to become. This house was my sanctuary now. His presence would be a contamination. "No, David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You can't." He flinched as if I'd struck him. He nodded, swallowing hard. I lost everything, Ruth." "You lost what you stole," I corrected him gently. "There's a difference." Tears mixed with the rain on his face. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. It was like a fever. Mark, the money." I lost myself. I felt a pang of something, not pity, not forgiveness, but a profound, weary sadness. "I know you did. But you have to find yourself without me, David. That part of our story is over." He stood there for a moment longer, a pathetic figure in the downpour, and then he turned and walked away, back into the storm he had created. I closed the door, leaning against it, my heart pounding. It was the hardest and easiest thing I had ever done. I walked to the kitchen and called Clara. "It's done," I said simply. "David?" She guessed instantly. "He came. I sent him away." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Clara's voice, softer than I had ever heard it. "Then you are finally free, my dear. Truly free." I hung up and looked around my quiet, warm kitchen. The unraveling was complete. The threads of deception they had woven had been pulled, and the whole tapestry of their lies had fallen apart. My own tapestry, once torn and faded, was now being rewoven, with threads of gold strength and silver truth, into something entirely new, and entirely my own. Freedom, I discovered, is a vast and sometimes terrifying country. For so long, my borders had been defined by David's needs, the company's demands, the walls of my home. Now, those borders were gone. The silence in my house was no longer an absence, it was a blank canvas. And I, for the first time in 30 years, was the only one holding the brush. The money, the victory, the vindication, they were the foundation. But a foundation is not a house. I had to build the house. The question was, what did I want it to look like? The first few weeks were disorienting. I would wake up and, for a moment, feel the old, familiar anxiety, the weight of a battle to be fought. Then I would remember it was over, and a strange listlessness would take its place. I had spent a year operating at a fever pitch of survival. Now that the threat was gone, my purpose felt blurred. Auntie Grace, sensing my drift, invited me on a trip. Not to a spa or a tourist trap, but to a quiet artist's retreat on the coast of Maine, a place she had gone for years to paint watercolors. I went, more to placate her than anything else. The retreat was a cluster of rustic cabins perched on granite cliffs overlooking a churning, gray Atlantic. The air smelled of salt and pine. There was no television, no internet to speak of. The rhythm of the days was dictated by the sun and the tides. In the mornings, I would sit on the porch of my cabin with a journal Grace had given me, its pages empty and accusing. One afternoon, frustrated, I abandoned the journal and walked down to the rocky shore. I found a piece of driftwood, smoothed by the sea to a silvery softness. Its shape was elegant, organic. Without thinking, I took out the small pocket knife I always carried for gardening, and I began to whittle. I wasn't trying to make anything. I was just following the lines of the wood, feeling its grain under my fingers. As I worked, the ceaseless roar of the ocean filled my head, washing away the echoes of legal arguments and David's angry voice. The scent of salt and damp earth replaced the sterile smell of Mr. Ponderosa's office. My mind, for the first time in years, was perfectly, utterly quiet. I was not a victim, not a plaintiff, not a symbol. I was just a woman on a beach, making shavings of wood curl around her feet. I looked down at the driftwood in my hands. I had unconsciously carved a gentle, flowing form, reminiscent of a wave or a bird's wing. It was beautiful. It was mine. And in that moment, the fog lifted. The spark I had felt when I rediscovered my old sketches reignited into a steady, clear flame. This was what I wanted, not to rest, not to retire, but to create. Not for a balance sheet, not for a client, but for the sheer, soul-filling joy of it. I returned from Maine a woman with a mission. I didn't go back to my quiet, empty house. I went straight to the large, detached garage at the back of my property, the original Havenworth and Sons workshop. It had been used for storage for years, a tomb for old lawnmowers and forgotten Christmas decorations. I swung the doors open. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light. I saw it not as a cluttered shed, but as a sanctuary. My sanctuary. I rolled up my sleeves. I spent days clearing it out, my body aching with a good, honest fatigue I hadn't felt in years. I donated the junk, organized the tools, and gave the space a deep, thorough clean. I bought a new, sturdy workbench. I installed better lighting. I brought down my box of old sketches and pinned them to a large corkboard on the wall. I was not rebuilding Havenworth and Sons. That company, with its corporate baggage and painful history, was David's domain now. I was building something new. I called it the Phoenix Project. It was my rebirth from the ashes of my old life. My first project was for Chloe. I designed and built a stunning, live-edge walnut desk for her new apartment, inlaying a subtle, mother-of-pearl crescent moon in the corner, a secret nod to the nickname I'd had for her since she was a child. When I delivered it, her tears of joy were a balm to my soul. This was the value I understood. Not stock valuations, but the priceless worth of a gift made with love. Word began to spread. Not the scandalous, headline-grabbing word, but a quieter, more potent kind. People heard that Ruth Havenworth was building again, not mass-producing, but crafting one-of-a-kind pieces. A neighbor commissioned a custom bookshelf. The local library asked if I would restore an antique rocking chair that had been in their children's section for 50 years. I said yes to every project that spoke to me. I worked with reclaimed wood, with interesting grains, with history. Each piece told a story. And as I worked, my hands remembering the familiar weight of a hammer, the sweet scent of sawdust filling the air, I felt myself healing. The workshop became my therapist's office, my church, my kingdom. One day, I was in the city, picking up a special order of Japanese hand tools, when I decided to walk past the old glass and steel office of Havenworth Holdings. I stood across the street, watching people come and go. It looked the same, but it felt utterly alien. It was just a building. It had no power over me anymore. As I turned to leave, I saw him. Mark Sterling. He was coming out of a cheap-looking coffee shop, his shoulders hunched against the wind. The $1,000 suit was gone, replaced by an off-the-rack jacket. He looked ordinary, deflated. The polished, predatory gleam was entirely absent. He was just a middle-aged man, down on his luck. Our eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, then a swift, shameful glance away. He quickened his pace and disappeared into the crowd. There was no anger left in me for him, no desire for revenge. He was simply irrelevant, a cautionary tale in someone else's story. My story was now written in the grain of the wood on my workbench, in the satisfaction of a finished piece, in the quiet, powerful knowledge that I had not just survived, I had been remade. I returned to my workshop. The afternoon sun was streaming in, illuminating the dust motes that my work stirred into a golden dance. On my bench was a half-finished cabinet, the oak sanded to a silken smoothness. I picked up my chisel, feeling its familiar, balanced weight in my hand. The past was a closed book. The future was a block of wood, full of potential, waiting for my hands to reveal the beauty hidden within. I took a deep breath, savoring the smell of oak and possibility, and I went back to work. I was building again. But this time, I was building a life not for us, but for me. And it was more beautiful than anything I had ever dreamed. Time has a way of sanding down the sharp, painful edges of our memories. The searing heat of betrayal, the cold terror of the unknown, the white-hot fury of the fight, they all soften, eventually, into something more manageable. They become part of your grain, the rings that tell the story of the tree you've become. It's been 2 years now since I signed those papers and walked out of Mr. Ponderosa's office into my new life. My workshop, the Phoenix Project, is no longer just a reclaimed garage. It's a thriving, joyful business. I don't have employees, but I have a few talented apprentices, young women who are eager to learn the craft, to build something with their hands that will outlast them. I teach them about wood, about joinery, but I also teach them about trust, about knowing their own worth. We have a sign above the door, carved from a piece of salvaged barnwood: build your own table, then decide who gets to sit at it. The financial security from the settlement allowed me this freedom, and I will always be grateful for that. But the true wealth, the fortune I guard most fiercely, is the peace that fills my days. The silence in my home is now a companion, not an enemy. It's a space for my thoughts, for the music I choose to play, for the simple pleasure of reading a book without interruption. My relationship with Liam healed, slowly and carefully. It took time for him to untangle the web of lies his father had spun. He came to me one day, his head bowed in shame, and apologized for doubting me. We cried together, and in that shared grief, we began to build a new, more honest relationship, one between two adults. Chloe, my fierce defender, is a constant source of light, her own career blossoming as she designs the branding for my small, bespoke furniture line. And David? He lives in a small apartment on the other side of town. He tried to start another business, a consulting firm, but the stain of the scandal proved indelible. We speak occasionally, mostly about the children, our conversations polite and distant, like two diplomats from countries that were once allies but are now permanently neutral. The love is gone, but the bitterness has faded too. He is a chapter I have read, learned from, and gently closed. On this particular afternoon, the workshop is filled with the golden, honeyed light I have always loved. I am putting the final touches on a rocking chair for a woman's first grandchild. The wood is cherry, and it glows with a warm, rosy light. As I rub a final coat of oil into the wood, feeling the silken texture emerge under my hands, my two apprentices, Sarah and Maya, are cleaning their benches, their laughter easy and bright. Auntie Grace and Auntie Clara are here too, sitting in the two comfortable armchairs I built for them in the corner I call my thinking nook. Grace is sipping herbal tea, her face serene. Clara, ever the critic, is running a discerning hand over the arm of the rocking chair. A bit heavy on the oil on this spindle, Ruth, she says, but there's a twinkle in her eye. She's proud of me, and her bluntness is her love language. Noted, Clara, I say with a smile, not stopping my work. We fall into a comfortable silence, broken only by the soft scrapes of cleaning and the distant song of a robin outside. This, I think to myself, this is the heart of it. This contentment, this sense of rightness, this circle of women I love and who love me in return. Sarah, the more outspoken of my apprentices, breaks the silence. Ruth, can I ask you something? Of course, dear. When you were going through it all, the betrayal, the lawsuit, were you ever just terrified? I mean, your whole life was being turned upside down. I put down my rag and lean against the workbench, looking at their young, earnest faces. Grace and Clara are listening too, their expressions soft. Terrified? I say, considering the word. Yes, every single day. It felt like the ground had turned to quicksand beneath my feet. I was 53 years old. I had dedicated my life to being a wife, a mother, a partner. And suddenly, I was told, in 1,000 subtle and not so subtle ways, that those roles were obsolete. That my experience was a liability. That my age made me irrelevant. I look around my workshop, at the tools hanging in their places, at the beautiful, functional pieces waiting to find their homes. They mocked my age, I continue, my voice soft but clear in the quiet space. David, Mark, that whole new shiny world they built. They saw my wrinkles and my history as weaknesses. They thought my time was over. But what I've learned, what I want you to carry with you, is that our greatest power often lies in the very things the world tells us to be ashamed of. I walk over to my corkboard, filled with my old yellowed sketches and new, vibrant designs. I point to them. My age meant I had a history, and in that history was the evidence I needed to reclaim my future. My experience in that garage, my knowledge of those ledgers, the relationships I'd built over decades, that was the arsenal I used to fight back. They thought they were dealing with a docile, menopausal woman. They didn't realize they were poking a bear who had been quietly building her den for 53 years, Maya smiles. So, the lesson is, get a good lawyer? We all laugh. A good lawyer is essential, I concede. But the real lesson is deeper. The lesson is to never, ever outsource your worth. Don't let your husband define it. Don't let your children be the sole source of it, and never, ever let a slick businessman in an expensive suit tell you what it is. My gaze sweeps over all of them, my apprentices, my ants. Your worth is not in your youth or your beauty or your flexibility. It is in your resilience. It is in the wisdom you've earned from every scar and every joy. It is in the quiet, unshakable knowledge of who you are and what you are capable of. They thought my age was a cage. But it was the key. It gave me the perspective to see their game for what it was. It gave me the patience to outlast them. And it gave me the wisdom to build a new life, not on the ruins of the old one, but with the strongest, most valuable stones I salvaged from it. I pick up a small, off-cut of the cherry wood, its grain a beautiful, complex map. A society that discards its older women is a society that throws away its library of wisdom right before the final exam. We are the keepers of the stories. We are the ones who remember how to build from scratch, because we've done it before. We know that a crack doesn't mean the whole structure is doomed. Sometimes it's just where the light gets in. I place the piece of wood in Sarah's hand. Hold on to your scars. They are your strength. And never ever let anyone make you feel that your time is over. My dears, for a woman who knows her worth, her time is always just beginning. The workshop is silent again, but it's a rich, full silence, pregnant with understanding. The light is fading now, casting long, deep shadows. The lesson has been given. It is not a loud, dramatic proclamation, but a quiet truth, passed from one generation of women to the next, in a room that smells of wood and hope. I look at my hands, no longer young, etched with the lines of my life, stained with the oil and grit of my craft. They are the hands of a woman who was mocked, betrayed, and almost broken. They are also the hands of a woman who fought back, who rebuilt, who learned to love her own company, and who found a profound, unassailable peace on the other side of the storm. They mocked my age, but I showed them my worth, and in doing so, I finally found it for myself. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.